So this session is on server screen management, window management. Byobu is something that's evolved over the last, basically the last year, born out of hallway conversations at UDS in Mountain View. Didn't really have a proper blueprint at the time. It just kind of sprang out of cool things we could do with screen in the Ubuntu server. It was useful and jaunty, far more useful, I think, in Karmic, as it sort of grew its own legs, was a bit faster and did fewer unexpected things to people who were used to using screen. At least that was the goal for Karmic. Here I'm proposing that there's additional places where we could and should use Byobu as a window manager in command line only environments, such as cloud instances, virtual machines that necessarily run detached, something that you're doing work in the background. You want to basically always run that in the background, reattach at later times. Separate from maybe the primary discussion, but a secondary idea kind of lumped in here is to use Byobu to restore desktop command line sessions. So in the same way that, say, a Firefox or an Evolution, when something crashes and those pop back up and recover your messages and your tabs, like in Firefox, this could be tied to the normal GNOME terminal, such that you click a text box which says always launch my GNOME terminal with Byobu, so that as you shut down your, or say you lose the desktop state, but you reestablish your GNOME terminal, you still have your programs and compilations and everything running in the background, rather than all that crashing with your whatever system.
For purposes of this session, can we focus in on the server side of it, and maybe have a separate desktop session on that? Then I think we have enough to talk about on that.
Yeah, sounds good. So the key change that we made in Karmic from Jaunty, in Jaunty, when you type screen, or a traditional screen user typed screen, they were prompted with this sort of annoying choose your Byobu colors, or default to normal screen, no Byobu anywhere in the mix. We got rid of that. It was kind of a nasty depackaged diversion that we used. For Karmic, you type screen, you're in screen. You type Byobu, you're in Byobu. So that separation is already was requested by a number of people in the last UDS. It's very easy for someone to launch Byobu and then say, I always want to launch Byobu when I log in, and reattach to my previous session if one exists. I'm proposing the controversial proposition that in some server environments, we default to that behavior and make it easy to opt out.
Default to it when they run screen, or default to it when they log in?
Default to it when they log in. So the way it basically looks right now is something like this. So if I SSH into my local machine, it just reattached me to the existing session that I've got running in this other tab right here.
What happens if you have run more than one SSH session?
It attaches to the most recently used one. It uses screen-X.
So you'll end up with both of them on the same Byobu session.
Right. You can hit F6 to detach from that one. You can do a screen-ls to see which sessions. I've only got one, but let's start up a new one.
I think that might be pretty confusing if people open multiple SSH sessions. Normally they expect to get different shells.
Right. So I think we need some configurable behavior there. There's actually an open bug about that. Some people want to attach to the same session. Some people want a list of sessions to interact and choose which session. Personally, I want as little interaction as possible when I SSH to a system. I want the most recently used one, but maybe someone wants the prompt. Someone wants a brand new one. So that could easily be a configurable. That could be something that's configurable. So now I've got two sessions, and if I SSH in, I should get the most recently touched session, which happens to be this one, which is not that one.
So can we start keeping a list of
what
issues or concerns?
Yes.
So, I think if I run an SSH session to my server, and I open another GNOME terminal, and I open another SSH session, if I got the same session, I would be pretty confused.
Okay. Well, the idea is that you're connected here. You say lose network connectivity. You go downstairs. you SSH back in. My mind is you want to be back where you were before, where you were r-syncing something and downloading something.
Sure. If there's nothing attached to that session, I agree.
Okay.
But if there is something already attached to it, and I realize it can be hard to tell if it's
its screen has the capability to do so.
Well, you could have a network connection that's still sitting open, even though it's dead.
The other thing too is that using the window aspect of Byobu, there's really not a point in my mind of having multiple Byobu sessions. In fact, I've just opened separate windows, so now I've got 0 through 4 across the bottom of this screen. Where in this one I can run top, and in this one I can want to run W3M. So it only really makes sense for me to have one session with lots and lots of windows open to this session. So rather than creating a new SSH session, which has all that overhead, I just hit the F2 button, and I've got yet another shell where I can do more.
It becomes an issue when you have more than, say, 20 shells open on that machine. I do that all the time.
Right, and sometimes you want to actually look at two things at once. Like you have maybe an S-trace in one of them, and an interactive session in the other one that is being S-traced.
So I mean, there's also a split screen, which is a function of screen. So this session is on server screen management, window management.
By default, people want to use it, but if the behavior changes in cases where they're not expecting it, then I think that's an issue.
Yeah, one other concern as far as the whole Byobu by default is when I actually configured my servers to automatically fire up Byobu when logging in, and what I ran into was mobile SSH clients, like I forget which secure shell client I had on my iPhone. I logged in, Byobu fired up, crashed my iPhone client, so I couldn't actually do anything.
It crashed the client.
Yeah.
Does Screen do the same thing?
Yeah, SSH client.
I'm sorry?
What's it called?
I think it's Tiny Term. Yeah, let's see.
Does Screen do the same thing?
No.
Okay.
It's just the fact that it's just, the fact that my status bar is wider than my screen.
Okay.
And so I got 6 lines of status bar and it just froze. And
where does it go?
In Tiny Term.
Yeah.
touch term.
But it doesn't matter. We would be the ones who broke it.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, well this is the problem with touch term, where if I run a command that spits out 1,000 lines of output, it crashes my SSH client as well.
Tiny Term or Touch Term?
Touch term. But no, my point is that if we did do, or you do Byobu by default, this is an extreme edge case, but a sysadmin is in a field somewhere, gets a page saying server's down and try to log in.
Sure.
Mobile clients might not be able to log in because.
And that's just something that will be just different enough about Ubuntu that it can trigger other issues that won't run other Linux distros. Another consideration I have is the default key binding.
Right.
I believe that's Control A at the moment.
Right. So the
something that I find infuriating.
Okay. So the way to change that, you see at the bottom, this is the default profile. There's lots of things you can put at the bottom of the screen. For discoverability, we have menu F9. So if I hit the F9 button and I come down here to change escape sequence, I'm prompted right now it's set to Control A. I can make that Control B just as easy as that.
Yeah, and I understand that. My concern is that if we're taking away right now, that key binding is available to the shell, and if we made this change, it would no longer be available to the shell, and that would.
Originally we started with Control G instead of Control A, just because
which is also
what you
used by
said.
the shell. Right.
But we started with that, and people said, "Oh, but you changed the screen default behavior."
Right.
Which is Control A.
We shouldn't change the default screen behavior.
So
which is
Control A.
Right. When you run screen, I'm saying if we were to make this the default login experience, that's a very different thing than when someone opts in by running screen. So I use Control A in my shell all the time, and I know quite a few other people who do.
So sure, you can do Control AA, which is the replacement for Control A, but that's
Do you have a suggestion for what the escape sequence should be?
What I generally use is the null byte, actually control space, which is not used in the shell that I'm aware of.
Okay.
We also have the option, I suppose, of not having a default binding, and having the user have to opt into creating one.
Okay.
What use case for the escape sequence? What the most useful thing you would do with the escape sequence? Because you have a function key for the detach.
Mm-hmm.
What what are the cases where you end up using this escape sequence?
As part of the change the escape sequence, the script that runs to do, or the Python code that runs to do change escape sequence, it goes through all the places that use can escape something and replaces that with whatever your new one is. So, in addition to being able to use Control A, and now I've actually changed my escape sequence to Control B. In addition to being able to hit F6 to detach, I can also, this is not real obvious here, but I can also hit Control B, what is it, D to detach? Yeah, and so I'm detached as well. So you've always got access to the escape sequence, the screen commands.
Yeah, but the point is, if we disable completely the escape sequence, what functionality of Byobu would be?
Oh yeah,
But
we would need an escape sequence.
But do you think that is in screen that is not specifically configuring what it will not be accessible?
Yeah, there's also taking over the F keys, like a bunch of them, right?
Any of the ones that, yes, F2, F3, F4, F5, F6, F7, F8, F9, and F12. Everything but F1, F10, and F11, which F1 pulls up no help, F10 pulls up the file menu, and F11 goes full screen. So, yes, but you can also come down here to change the key binding set.
Right.
And you can, by default, it's set to the F keys. You can click the screen escape keys, and that's turned off.
I think all this configurability is great, but it's much more important that we get the defaults.
Defaults, right.
As a general principle, if I can suggest, for if we consider this by default, folks who are just, someone who's running 910 as used to logging in and working a certain way, if we do something like this in some places on 10.4, they should be able to log in and work the same way. It should not, introduce any regressions.
Agreed. I absolutely agree.
And that in general, they should need to opt into anything that's going to, require that they
Change
choose
it.
between the open functionality and functionality that they're used to.
Okay.
So I think there's some, even if we, we made it completely invisible, and there was no escape sequence functionality, then there is still some value that would be in it. You would still be able to reattach and things like that by default. But we would need some way to make the additional functionality discoverable in order for it to be more. And we have the status line. That's one way.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, the idea here with the menu F9, previously when you launch Byobu, you would throw it into the help screen first. But that also changed like the behavior of, I just want to launch a shell and start using it. And so what we used instead was we put this F9 menu to make it more discoverable. You do that, you've got access to the help and anything else that, here are the F keys that are used, by the way. The F9, I think, is the discoverability. So anything we want to sort of put in addition to just a normal shell environment with window management, we can easily put into there.
But at that point, you've already taken over one of their key bindings that they might be using. So maybe it would be better to just have it display, a command that you could run.
It's Control A at also brings up or now it's Control B at the at symbol, Control escape sequence, and at symbol brings up the menu. So there are bindings for each of anything that you can do with the F keys, you can do with an escape sequence and something else as well.
Right. So I'm suggesting that there should be no default key bindings.
Okay.
I think because I don't see any other way to preserve, the experience that people have in 910. Do you see another option?
I totally love the key bindings.
Right, but you've opted into the key bindings. This is about people who do not know or care, or maybe even are not even interested in Byobu. We're going to give it to them as well.
Yeah, it becomes a problem because you're using it by default. Right?
Yes.
And
So, that's certainly doable. If I come in here, I'm going to change my escape sequence back to A because that's already bothering me. But if I turn off the F keys and just use the screen escape keys, this menu should refresh momentarily and what is it? I reload. I don't even remember how to reload without the F9 display, menu F9 should then say Control at or whatever.
So that should be something that people run.
command that can run inside the shell
To do what?
to get that configuration in.
Absolutely. It's Byobu-config. And now I'm all lost without my key things. I don't know how to do anything anymore.
Control Alt Control AM for the next screen.
For the next screen, right.
And now you can
So I can
flash
do config, and that will launch this. I'm trying to refresh my,
The menu bar?
Yeah.
And restart. Detach it.
but that won't do it. Add key bindings. So to refresh is Control A, capital R. No. Where's the definition? I'm sorry. I don't.
So yeah, I don't think we need the full tour.
Okay. Yeah,
But
totally.
I think everyone recognizes there is some additional functionality that we could provide here. By default, I'm mainly concerned about how we would do that in a non-intrusive way. This is something that we can experiment with in pretty without much cost. Like for example, in EC2.
Sure.
If we rolled into EC2 images early on, get some feedback.
Right.
It's easy to roll it back out.
Right.
People don't like. I can see the bug reports now. You've taken away one line of my screen.
Absolutely.
Terminal.
2. In fact, oh my God, 2. Is this something that we could get any assistance? I talked to Ivanka about this in Karmic, and she gave me some ideas as far as the layout, and I took everything that she said and implemented. Is this something that we could get some user experience help with, or is this really not their bag of tricks?
I mean, it's just a matter of prioritization. There's no reason not to ask.
Okay. From a branding perspective, I think it's tremendous to have screenshots that say Ubuntu 9.10 at the bottom anytime someone's putting a picture in a magazine.
Yeah, that's nice, but I don't think it's a good. I don't think that users will agree that that's a good reason for us to make that change.
One thing I wanted to report, because I've been starting using Byobu on my remote servers too, and try to use it as the default shell to be as close as possible as what we want to do here. And one problem I had is the exit sequence, because when I message into a server, I end up in Byobu as well, but then when I exit, I end up in
Another shell?
In another shell, which is in limbo, somewhere in between. I'm no longer inside Byobu, and if it's the default shell, then we should basically exit directly.
Yeah,
it's
so
the same with detach. At one
we
point,
can handle
we need to detach completely.
Yeah, we can handle that with an exec right here. Basically, the problem early on when I was experimenting with this is that if for some reason Byobu launcher crashed, I was having a lot of trouble getting back to a shell because the last thing that my .profile was doing was execing something. So that's certainly a behavior that we can do where you type exit, you're completely detached and exiting from the system.
I think in the default shell mode we should have this because it's confusing. Because there is all this branding. You can have different colors for each server,
sure.
etc. And you end up it looks like you're back on your local environment,
right?
And you're not.
Yep.
Another issue I'm having is that I'm losing everything that is displayed at login on normal shell.
So like the mod-D?
That's not displayed on login, is it? Oh
yes. I get that though. Are you sure you don't have
You're being reconnected to the same.
Yeah, if you're being reconnected, you're not going to get it. But on your first launch, you should absolutely be getting the message of the day. Your Byobu may be customized somehow.
So maybe that's why. But my issue that when I'm logging back in, there are some interesting information that I get from MOTD if I'm not using Byobu, which I'm losing completely. For example, the number of packages to update. And
so you did that.
That's in the MOTD.
You also did it at the bottom of Byobu. The number of packages available is the red number that shows up.
Yeah, but there's more than this in the MOTD, as you well know. And my question is, shouldn't Byobu offer to have another screen by default that shows a refresh of MOTD on a regular basis?
You can absolutely do that.
I know I can do it. My question is, in order to provide a similar experience, shouldn't we, by default, open Byobu with another screen that is a refresh of MOTD?
I think in the default install, you just get one window. I mean, again, in your manage default windows, there are some suggested default windows you can add to this list.
Talking about exactly this window, I think you should have customized command. Like for example, I want to run, I don't know, ERC. So a way to add from here, I want to run ERC or math every time I log in.
Right.
You can do that.
You do that.
Yeah, I can. Using BI editing as well.
No.
From the menu.
Create a new window right here,
New window.
and then that'll put it in this list of default windows that you want to launch on login. And so if I select each of these 4, and the next time I start a brand new Byobu session, all 4 of these are going to start up.
Create new window. You use the menu, create new window.
Yeah.
Then you will see it appear. You manage.
So now I've got
New window. Oh, command window. Okay.
I've got these 4 windows launching by default. But as Matt said, this really isn't a tour of Byobu. This is what will we need to fix if we wanted to attempt to do
No,
this.
yeah, I just didn't follow that. I thought it wasn't there, so my fault.
To continue on the topic of exit, I was wondering if we wouldn't need to make detach a little more intuitive for the user. Basically, when you exit, you could have the option of saving the status and to keep. I don't know exactly how we can make it an option.
So
like save and exit and exit. You know, in a regular application, you have the option to save the status. On Firefox, you can save the tab layout.
Yeah, so that's a feature request for sure. The Firefox type feature, save my tabs, so that the next time I start up, try to do that.
That's not my point. I wanted to basically to exit completely from Byobu, you have to close all the windows and then.
No, there's a screen kill all.
Right, but then it's not really easily discoverable.
Say again.
K, I believe.
Control A, K kills one window. Is it Control capital K?
Shift K.
Control capital K? No, it's killing one window. There is a kill everything.
Then it's not really easily discoverable. My point is, you can have this F12 to exit completely, and F11 to detach and exit, and then you end up with these 2 choices you have when to exit completely that are directly accessible to the system. You don't have to close every single shell, and then you can.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a finite number of F keys. I tried to choose the ones that are the most frequently used.
Well, but if talking in terms of the expectations that they have for the default behavior now, if you log in and you do some stuff and then you exit, it goes away. Like as long as you don't create new windows, that should.
There you go. It's Control A /. So if I try that,
should not save anything.
really quit and kill all of your windows.
You get new stuff.
So if Byobu were the default login shell, then you would log in, you could run some commands. If you exit, then that would disconnect you. That would end your SSH session. If you create additional windows, then that would start to change the behavior. But at that point, you're opting in. You're asking for that additional functionality.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's just that detach is great, and it's not really intuitive what it does for a user that is not used to what.
So originally Nick had the Control A / bound to F6. So when you hit F6, you killed everything and you detached. For one thing, that was really destructive, and it was quite easy to kill a bunch of work that was going on. The second thing is that, to me, the beauty of Screen is being able to detach. And maybe that's kind of a selfish decision to make F6 detach.
I agree with you.
Screen is all about doing stuff, attaching, reattaching, attaching, reattaching.
I agree with you.
But there are other things that can do the same without all the key bindings and all that stuff anyway. Like there's another thing called detach, but only does that. DTACH, detach. It's a very, very simple thing. It doesn't have any default key bindings. It all it does is has a command line interface to let you detach and reattach again.
So it just runs a sub shell and then lets you detach it. Or is it like Screen? Is it actually
It's not Screen. It sets up a PGY and acts as a mediator.
2 other things that come to mind. Single user mode. I mean, would this be? I assume we would not make this a default for root.
I don't think so. No, I think as far as rescue and recovery, I've got no intention on trying to replace the very busy box-based, root shell.
I use just Bash if you want.
Bash, okay. I have done some work to make Byobu work under BusyBox. It actually runs in my Palm 3, which is a BusyBox-based system that has screen on it. So it works pretty well in bare minimum mode. But
what about on the local console?
On the local
considerations there?
Yeah, so it's if you're running KMS, it's absolutely gorgeous. I wonder if I'm not going to get no. With KMS, and there's 128 bytes wide and 40 something tall. I've got laptops that have no X, but running on the TTY, it's incredible to have.
Is there any reason why people might not want it on the console?
I think it would be the same reasons that people wouldn't want it as their SSH shell.
The only time I ever log into a machine on the console is when it's broken.
Right.
And if it's broken, it's probably having a hard time starting things. So starting anything other than, and even starting Bash can take it like 5 minutes. So anything that makes that more painful might be annoying. And it just gets me closer to, I'm just going to turn the power off.
Yeah, it's just some level of additional complexity. There's more things that could go wrong in starting your shell.
Yeah, and
You're swapping.
earlier you guys made a joke about, oh my God, we lost 2 lines of text. Well, on console, that matters.
Yeah, on a 25-line console, that matters. On the 40-line KMS console,
Right.
like I'm saying, it's as good as, it's so fast compared to X on like a netbook or something like that. I think it's actually pretty cool on the console. But it's fine for me that in that situation is something you opt in. I launch it, or I log in, and then I type Byobu to get a better environment. If I don't want it, I stay without. From a cloud perspective, I think that's a better place to sort of introduce this as fun Ubuntu food. If you're going to run Ubuntu server in your virtualization instances, I think it could be a compelling reason to make the Ubuntu server friendlier to someone who's using that as their virtualization. Yes.
What other considerations might there be there? Any what would we need to change in order to make that non-disruptive?
One thing about the virtualization is, I think you wrote a blog post about it. You can just run it with dash courses, like the KVM with dash courses, and you can have those.
Well, he's talking about something a little bit different, but yeah, that's actually.
We're talking about an EC2 and UEC.
If we decide to launch Byobu by default in EC2 instances, what other considerations do we have? We can actually have configure a more interesting set of default status notifications at the bottom. For instance, the CPU frequency doesn't make as much sense. Let's say, so the toggle status notification.
Disk space.
CPU frequency doesn't make as much sense, but EC2 cost might be more.
Lots of different ways that we could configure it, but what are the actual functional issues? Like, what are people going to object to if we were to do this?
It costs more.
Because you're sending more bytes over the wires.
Because you're doing slightly more computation.
It is slightly. Okay. So that's a good point. I've got a test suite that is part of the build I run prior to building it that makes sure that none of the notifications have regressed in terms of how much performance. It runs each of them a couple of thousand times to make sure that they haven't slowed down, because making a one-line change to one of these shell scripts could make it incrementally slower. I also make sure that whenever my laptop is only running Byobu and nothing else, that my load, which you can see right here, is at 0.06 while I'm still doing other things. I want that to be at 0, and it does go to 0 when I've got nothing else running besides Byobu. So
what about, so there are various terminal applications which exhibit bugs when running under screen. Whether those are bugs in the application or
Sure.
the screen, nobody really knows. It's really complicated, but sometimes things move.
Right.
And we would be introducing them to that rate. I think URC is one that people sometimes say has.
No, I use UC inside
There
Byobu.
are some subtleties, like line wrapping. It screws up line wrapping the screen.
Yeah, Mutt occasionally behaves a bit weird and strange on the screen.
All these things in screen.
I use that as well.
I'm not saying that it doesn't work. I'm saying that there are some places where the behavior changes, not
Okay.
always.
Right. Maybe.
is that something that we would... Are those things that... I guess it's important to consider whether those are things that people would run in the places where we would be doing this. So would people run their screen, their IRC client in a cloud instance? Maybe.
Seems logical.
Okay.
Well, I don't know if you have your own private cloud and you offer it to people as a service, say, so that they can run an IRC proxy.
Right.
What I found,
Yeah.
what I found really strange was like, for example, I use offline IMAP, and for my connectivity at home, I lose connectivity from time to time. So I used to run offline IMAP with a while true do offline IMAP. So when it breaks, it starts again.
Yep.
And I can't make it run on default. If I add it to the create new window while it runs, and then it shows the window for 2 or 3 seconds, and then it's killed, like process ended.
Chris, for your edification, my load did drift to 0 while running this. And, I mean, it's something that the performance is something I did a lot of work in Comic on, and I keep control of. I also make sure that time Byobu true, so that I run exactly one thing in Byobu and make sure that can exit in. I think it's about a half a second.
It wasn't a hugely serious one.
It's something that I do over and over and over again to make sure that it's quick and responsive and so forth. Matt, another consideration, potentially it's not something that I think we're very good at in the server anyway, but Elmo last time raised concerns about Asian characters in screen. I've turned on as much of the UTF-8 and so forth configuration that screen can handle, as I couldn't tell you whether the Asian characters are being shown correctly or not. It's not something I can really verify very easily. I do know that they do not show up well in this bottom menu down here. You do get a lot of missing characters, the weird little character not found. Inside of the meat and potatoes aspect of it, the Asian people that I've conferred with said, yeah, it looks fine inside of the other 24 lines of...
Yeah, I've done Japanese input, Ariana just fine.
Okay.
I know this is on a Mac logged into a Ubuntu system, but yeah.
Okay.
That's one of the things you find, like VTE has some problems with Unicode characters that are strange numbers of characters in one.
Yeah.
And so, so you can think it's maybe a screen problem or something, but it might actually be a terminal.
Yeah.
Well, so I just noticed you scrolling. How does it deal with scrolling?
Okay, so there's that's a great question. So there's basically 2 different scroll buffers that you have to keep in mind. One is the scroll buffer that screen actually maintains, and that's the one I would say to use. So let me just put up a bunch of text. Right now, I've got each window in Byobu is right now configured to 10,000 lines of scroll back. And so if you hit F7, that enters screen scroll back mode. And in this window, I can say scroll back up in this, so that was fine.
But what happens when you use the scroll bar in your GNOME?
Right.
That's what's more important.
Exactly. So in the GNOME terminal, this is just whatever GNOME terminal sees. So the last thing GNOME terminal saw was /find/etc. So if I page up find/etc, I see that. Now let me move back over to the lib menu, and if I start scrolling back up here, I'm going to see the last thing that GNOME terminal saw, which was etc. That's maybe not intuitive, and that's a bug that we've gone back and forth on in terms of what's the right behavior. Because I can disable shift page up altogether and force you to use F7. However, if you've only got one window open, shift page up is kind of useful. So it's just...
Yeah, well, what I often find when I'm on screen in GNOME Terminal is that when I scroll up in GNOME Terminal, I don't get any scroll back. Is that just me?
I get that.
That's default configuration of screen. So
def scroll back off is the default configuration. We've turned def scroll back on.
Okay, so in Byobu, that's all.
That's all. Yeah.
Well, it's different. As you can see, I mean, you don't have to scroll back and see all the stuff from each of the sessions. If you use the scroll bar.
Okay. Get it?
That's what?
I just want to put it into the notes.
That's a consequence of having multiple screen windows open at the same time. We could also I would say for default users, not advertise creating sub-windows so much. And then...
Isn't that just... That's the number of lines in scroll back. What changes this behavior?
I think
It's one of the term cap infos.
that one. Yeah, I think.
Yeah, I think it's this one right here. It turns off alternate screen switching, so that's the screen going to external scrollback buffer. Yeah, so the comment explains what it's doing. Again, something we can make configurable or change the default behavior. What we found was that people complained when they couldn't hit shift page up to scroll back. The trade-off is that when you hit shift page up, sometimes the output is non-intuitive.
But if the use case is connecting to a remote server, then we could also try to force the user into using only a single window, and then your problem isn't so much a problem because shift page up wouldn't have a weird behavior if you only have one window, and then make it have an expert mode for the guy that...
My recommendation is always to use screen scrollback buffer because it's so damn good and because it's separate per window. And in fact, screen scrollback buffer supports regexes, so I could do...
all that is great, and people can use the screen scrollback mechanism if they want to, but if the issue is that if we change the behavior with their existing scrollback mechanism, that's going to confuse people.
For using it by default on EC2, I would basically make the possibility to create new windows a little more difficult to find, and so that by 90% of the users would end up using a single window, have all the benefits of the notification stuff, and not creating sub-screen windows, and then...
Why would users not want to create...
Because then you would have the weird scrollback behavior, you know? And in the EC2 case, you can open as many windows.
We don't create any. We only create one window by default.
That's right, only one by default.
Yeah, but it's just a function key away to create more.
The key bindings are an issue that we would need to address.
Because if
they can run screen to open a new window, right?
Yep.
So I don't think that's a separate issue than the key bindings.
And one other question we need to ask, if we were to consider for default for EC2, is it the right release to change it? Because we'll have basically we'll ship UEC and EC2 images for Lucid. Those will change. Like you said, we can experiment it first and see the feedback and decide afterwards.
Well, first we have a list of issues that we already know that we're going to have. We need to address those, make sure that we've addressed those to our satisfaction first, and then we can try it out and see if there are more issues that we might not have turned up.
Could it be made part of the user data to activate this or not?
Yes.
Sure. Deactivate it. Sure.
Yeah.
You could even have UEC, Yuka, or EC2 command that helper that runs, because Byobu is installed by default on the image anyway.
Yeah, and the notification bar down here at the bottom, that's a good place where we could put like a little asterisk or something like that UEC users know to go and look for more information or how-tos or whatever. I mean, the status bar is as powerful as what we were using Landscape sysinfo to do in terms of giving users certain things about their system. We can put like a little bit of information here and then give them a special key binding to go and find more information about whatever, which is what this is.
Another concern, which again is just a generic screen issue, is that I believe line wrapping behavior changes. Right? When you triple click to copy lines out of GNOME Terminal, if it's in screen, then that only selects by visible lines rather than logical lines. So if you have lines on your screen which have wrapped, then you get different behavior in screen versus outside of screen.
Right. So let me see if I can reproduce what you're saying.
So just copy and paste a line out of the Gabi notes that's longer than 80 characters.
So triple click this, or
just copy and paste something that's longer than 80 characters into cat or something. Not VI, because that's changing your terminal settings.
Just echo.
Just echo it. Okay, then triple click. Oh, that's working in Byobu. Maybe you're using different settings.
Yeah, we've heavily customized Screen to make it usable by the masses. That's the idea, is to take same defaults where Screen picks safe defaults. And that's part of the reason why we renamed the project from Screen Profiles to something completely different, Byobu, that doesn't try to be just Screen. It's trying to be a layer on top of Screen that makes Screen accessible to more people.
That's an interesting fallback plan to be able to select Byobu as the default mechanism by user data, because if we do inside our UC images, we put the logic to change the shell based on user data, then you can expose the functionality really easily. Even
can you add that to the agenda for tomorrow's session on EC2 push config? That is an interesting one. That could be a config option, so at least we can write a simple toggle to turn it on or off.
Yep, that's a good idea. Just going to say something else. Unfortunately, I don't have any updates available to my system, but you would see those in red with an exclamation point right here. In fact, I could probably enable.
How do I know what those things mean?
Byobu describes every single one of them.
Okay.
With a system mail for the current user, the letter bracket M is displayed in the lower bar, and left in black text on a gray background, been available, etc. So these are alphabetized and match the same notifications that are shown right here.
Okay.
So there's, and then I guess the one thing I just showed is this special key binding Control A $, which runs every single notification, and then it shows you like the very brief x86 64, or so your CPU frequency is 2.4 gigahertz, and this is using BEM folding to kind of expand what's going on here. So I was about to, let's see, switch to that list. So surely I'll have a Chromium update available. The updates mechanism should be triggered by a change to one of my varlib, dpackage, whatever files, which will trigger the rerun the updates, check updates available. So I should see at least the daily Chromium updates pop up at the bottom.
So are you trying to illustrate another possible issue that we might have?
Oh, sorry. No, I was explaining the story how how you find out what two exclamation point in red means.
And if you need to reboot, it's a blue hat.
So I can easily see which updates are available now by going to the updates available thing, expanding this, and seeing that Chromium browser and Chromium codecs can be updated.
So we've got 10 minutes.
Okay. So the actions so far that need to be fixed, let me make sure that I understand each of these if you've taken notes. So the listing sessions, that's one that's in progress already. Right now we automatically attach the most recent. What are you saying you think the most sane behavior would be on a new SSH session to a system where you're launching Byobu by default?
I think that the behavior when you open multiple SSH sessions should not change.
So you should get a new shell each and every time. A new Byobu session each and every time.
I don't know about that.
Okay.
I will say make that by default, but make it an option that you can configure, like
Recover.
Sure,
recover.
Yeah.
But when do we ever want to attach to the same? What would be the purpose of
So
that?
why would I want a different one when I can just open a new
Because I'm
window?
disconnected.
If I'm still connected, you will have two windows connected to the same session.
If you're still attached, that we could add some logic that if you already have you're already attached to that session. I need to see how quickly it expires it. If you drop SSH connectivity, how quickly that gets marked as a detached session.
That's
I do it all the time. I'm working in Byobu on one terminal. At some point, I'm starting to have to do some cut and paste, for example. I open a second session in the same Byobu environment so that I can have twice the same screen or switch between my different screens. And that's very useful to me.
or you have your session running on your computer, your desktop computer, like Chris is running on his desktop computer, then he's in the data center and he needs the same Byobu as in his desktop. And so
I mean,
this is rather special.
You're asking a different question, aren't you? Like, if you've opened an SSH session and you're running a shell, you're doing some work there. When you open another SSH session, why would you ever want to see that same shell?
Right.
I agree with you. I don't think that ever would.
Yeah. I think that's a great point. That's logic I could add. So right now, SSH back home, literally, and if I open a new tab and I SSH back home again, I think you're right. Since I'm already attached to that session right here, I probably shouldn't attach back to the same session. I should probably.
But still, you get for those to be part of the same Byobu session, then you can move your windows around.
And still, you can move, like you can have, like just are the same. In one, you can go to Windows 0, and the other one still in Windows 2.
Right. Yeah. So these are separate. So here I'm on Windows 2. On this one, I'm moving back and forth. Say Windows 0.
So rather than spawning a new Byobu session, would it not be good to spawn a new window? So if you have
what you get is you get the same window that you had over there.
Yeah.
What we're saying is that it's not useful. But it is useful for it to be the same session. So a new window in the same session.
Yes. As a full behavior.
Is that captured somewhere? Can someone make sure? Okay.
Yeah, I think that will make more sense. Instead of running another Byobu session, just a new window in this.
That's quite doable. Yeah. So the escape sequence, that's a tough one, Matt. I see where you're coming from. I think we're going to really confuse screen users who expect Control A to be the default.
Also, I will make this option configurable. Like you can turn this on or off.
Turn what on or off?
The new window thing.
Sure. Yes. That will be configurable. Anything. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, anything that changes Byobu's behavior from what it was before will make configurable for existing Byobu users. Right now, the consideration is for shell users. What would we need to do to make Byobu non-invasive for shell users, such that it's good and as little bad as possible? Ideally, no bad for those people. Besides the 2 lines that it's obviously going to cost at the bottom of it. Relative to an EC2 session or something like that, where you've got lots of space, it's not such a big deal. But the only time it's really fixed is, as Chris was saying, if you're actually on the UI.
Also, I'm thinking about what if I'm just a shell user, I SSH into my server several times, I will end up with like 1,000 of windows and not reusing them anytime.
If you opened 1,000 sessions, then I suppose you would, but usually you log out of them.
Let's say 4.
4, yeah, then you have 4 windows.
Do you have the interesting behavioural change that if you SSH into your machine, you get a new window in the existing Byobu session? When you hit exit, you're not going to disconnect. You're going to pop to the next one in the stack.
Yes, that's a new issue.
And so you're now not logging out by typing exit.
Right, and that's where I use the either F6 or the Control Alt. Control.
And if you don't do that, that's fine. But if you're
but just we're talking about
also linked to that same problem, if the default behavior on an SSH session is to spawn a new window, then by just closing the terminal, all you're doing is attaching from the screen session. So if you SSH once a day, after a year, you can have 360 odd, windows, aren't you? Because each new SSH connection opens a new window. You're only detaching, aren't you?
Yeah, the logic. There's going to need to be logic in whether or not there's attached sessions or detached sessions.
Yeah, I think it should be if there's a Byobu session running there and nothing attached to it, then it makes sense to attach to it.
Without creating a new window.
Without creating a new window.
Right. Which right now is the default behavior. So the new behavior would be
confusing as well. Like sometimes you log in and you get an existing shell that you were working in, and sometimes you log in and you get a new shell.
Personally, I like the current behavior. When I SSH in, I know that I'm in the session that's running. If I want a different session, I hit F6 and I launch a brand new session. If that's what I want.
You wrote Byobu, you opted into this, you're used to it.
Yeah.
Like about everyone else who
Also, if you're talking about shell users, we're talking about like more technical users. used to know what they're doing, so
we're even more sensitive about changes in their environment.
I've learned that in this. Yes.
Okay, yeah.
For first-time screen users, they're floored. Oh, you can do all this in screen. This is so much easier than trying to write, screen configuration files, which are just miserable.
The target audience is the novice screen user.
Discover
it can do all these things, but we also need to appeal to the default user.
Right.
Okay, but I don't think we're going to be able to resolve all of these here, especially since we have only 3 minutes, and you want to continue reviewing them and make sure you understand what the issues are.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, everything so far is, I think, technically solvable. I haven't encountered anything that no key binding by default required user opt-in. That's probably the one that I disagree with the most, but that's really a blocker. It's just a matter of resolving the disagreement.
Well, I mean, dumb question. Do the F keys require key binding in order to operate?
Yeah, they do.
Right. So how can you have no default key binding if you need a key binding to set the key binding?
Okay, so that is a technical limitation.
But your MOTD can say you're running inside, or the initial thing, you're running inside Byobu to configure this, run this command, and you get the menu.
Yeah.
And the first thing it can be is enable key bindings.
Yeah. So the key binding one, I propose that we need to have a follow-on discussion, and I can implement it a couple of different ways, and we can try it out and see what works best. As far as funny clients, there are some open bugs about PuTTY, for instance, which behaves differently than GNOME Terminal. So your iPhone SSH client is probably one of a class of clients. Now that's something that PuTTY just runs funny within screen. It's not anything Byobu's done badly. It's just screen.
Yeah, the touch term issue isn't Byobu over screen. It's when it gets a lot of text data all at once. It just peaks.
Yeah, the 2 lines being controversial, I think that's just cost benefit. It costs 2 lines, but it's useful. I don't think that's such a big deal for SSH sessions where you're on a desktop that has lots of space. It's a bigger issue on a TTY, but we're not suggesting doing this by default on a TTY.
Our default GNOME terminal window size is not going to change, especially since people are logging into other clients doing their servers. So we are actually taking that away from we're making that decision for them. Like they could make their terminal window bigger, but
Could we use a single line status?
Or could we behave differently based on what terminal is connecting?
No, use a single line and drop the to line 10 or something like that.
both of those are possible. One line I think would be half as controversial as 2, approximately.
If we are connecting from an iPhone, is that detectable?
I don't know.
You need to be a bit careful with that.
No, don't do that.
The first one is more.
So, I mean, ultimately what it comes down to is that it's a one-button click. Byobu currently launches that login toggle off code. It won't launch. It will not be used next time you log in. I want it back on. I do that, it's back on. So it's a real easy opt-out mechanism if you can hit F9 and do that. And okay.